Good afternoon. Welcome to the second panel of the Schiller Institute's June 27th conference, Will Humanity Prosper or Perish? The Future Demands a Four-Power Summit Now. This is the second panel of our conference, and it is entitled, The World Needs 1.5 Billion New Productive Jobs to End War, Famine, Poverty, and Disease. Our first panelist for today is Jacques Cheminade, president of Solidarité et Progrès of France. He's speaking on how food production can unite the world.
Good morning. I am very honored to be with you and very happy today because of all what you have done until now, and mainly because of what we are all going to do after this Schiller conference. Food production unites the world. We are all conscious of the fact that the two first human rights to be upheld are to feed and to fed and to be kept in a good, healthy condition in order to contribute to the common good and the future of our societies. If we look at the world as it is, we cannot but recognize that these two human rights are continuously and constantly violated, and that the present policies of the main states and institutions, with a few remarkable exceptions, are leading us towards a world which is going to be much worse if we let it be. We are set to become inhuman. The question is therefore not to comment anymore about what is happening or to complain, but to do something about it. That's why we're here, to mobilize the best of our cultures and our nations to generate a world where the true creative powers of humanity will prosper against all odds. It starts by food production, which unites all people beyond and above cultural and language barriers. It seems commonplace to say that, to say such things. But the fact that we are morally and economically compelled to do so is precisely the sign of the inhuman condition in which we have been plunged, with the immediate threat that 100 million of our fellow human beings could die from hunger, 300,000 per day. 300,000 per day, we are told, while the farmers are trapped into a Malthusian world where they literally can't breathe. If we start from what humanity needs, taking into account the requirements for adequate quantity and quality diet, sufficiency for everyone, and the indispensable need to create food reserves, we must first double our food production. To produce 5 billion tons, for example, of grain means to more than double the present world harvest. We here in the United States, we American farmers can feed the world, and it's true. We here in Europe, we European farmers can feed the world, and it's true. And we here in the rest of the world, we also can secure our food security and sovereignty, and it's true. So what's happening? What's happening which makes that this potential is not actualized? First, the whole world is ruled by the financial dictatorship of Wall Street and the City of London, who cannot care less for people and in fact openly promote world depopulation. Unable, in their own terms, to keep their power and to feed the world at the same time, they prefer to keep their power and envisage a world population with less than 2 billion human beings. Their policy is to kill, either by murderous action or by voluntary neglect. They let their ideologues openly front for it under black or green colors. Second, the outgrowths of this financial dictatorship, the food and farming cartels, dominate or control all the chains of transportation, distribution, and sales foodstuffs, including the property of vast domains of land. Third, an anti-productivist ideology is promoted among the urban sectors of the service economy, dominant in numbers among our Western countries, betting on both their ignorance and what a productive life is, ignore what a productive life is, and their cultural pessimism induced by the media and the entertainment sectors. There were no stocks of masks or tests in our Western states to deal with the pandemic, with the coronavirus pandemic, just as there are almost no grain reserves today to deal with the food shortages. The World Trade Organization and the cartels left it up to the marketplace. As a result, China has now 1 year grain stocks for its needs, for its own needs. Russia, 6 months, the United States much less, and the European Union barely 45 days, probably much less. Under its Green Deal, the European Commission has decided to cut by 50% the use of pesticides, by 20% the use of fertilizers, and by 50% the use of antimicrobials. It expects to transform 25% of the land into bioproductions, against 7.5% today. The point here is that under the pretext, under the guise of caring for us, they obey to their financial masters and cut the means of production without providing any alternative to feed us and feed the world. It's criminal not to maintain food reserves. It's criminal to have brought farming prices below the cost of production. It's criminal to have pitted the producers of the world against each other to lower the prices paid to them for the benefit of the worldwide cartels in grains, seeds, meat, seafood. It is criminal that in the poorest countries of the world, 70% of the production is allowed to be lost. About to be lost, because there are no cold chains and too many rodents left. It is criminal to compel those countries to pay more for the debt service to financial agencies than for building and maintaining hospitals and schools. It is, as Lyndon LaRouche repeatedly said, the model of the British East India Company, spread now all over the world, controlling the chains of production, transportation, and trade. So this crisis should be the opportunity to recognize the absolute right to produce food and to get rid of the cartel monopoly system. This, of course, cannot be done as a thing in itself. It demands to shut down their source. It demands a shutdown of their source of money supply. The Wall Street and City of London rule, the British Empire. The criminal policies in the area of food and health are, in that sense, for the people of the world, visible, the visible side of the oligarchy's iceberg, and our main weapon, therefore, to fight them, to fight this oligarchy. To show them that to fight for a new Glass-Steagall Act, to show the peoples of the world that to fight for a new Glass-Steagall Act, a credit public policy, a national bank, is not a technical question, but a very concrete matter of life or death. The present financial system cannot be maintained through the rule of an unjust law and order. which has mutated into a system of chaos and disorder based on an everything bubble which kills the more and more that it inflates. Therefore, we have to come back and rethink about how we can inspire a strategy based on the four laws of Lyndon LaRouche, because they represent the architectural unifying body for a change. To put it more concretely, the only possible exit door from the present fire. As I am in Western Europe, I feel obliged to tell you how something which had a good start but failed because its environment was not shaped by a coherent principle corresponding to the four laws of Lyndon LaRouche. I am talking about European agricultural policy launched on July 30, 1962. It was based on four goals: increasing productivity, securing a fair living standard for food producers, establishing a sort of parity price, including reinvestments, securing the food supplies, and securing also a reasonable price for consumers. It worked for about 30 years, based on a self-sufficient single market with a productive priority connected to industrial progress, modern tractors, fertilizers, pesticides, plus financial solidarity and a European preference. The financial aids and support were given in the form of a minimum price guaranteed to the producer. This was called indirect aids. As a result, the common market members, as it was called in those days, it was not the European Union, it was the common market, became self-sufficient, and Western Europe grew to be the second world exporter of foodstuffs. The farms grew moderately inside, progressively and moderately, and the whole agricultural sector underwent a period of relative prosperity despite, or better said, within its in-depth and fast transformation. Today, we have all European farmers desperately protesting, hostage to the banks, and living on subsidies, having become indebted, working hard, and gaining very little in some sectors. From the beef stuff, they are losing money, with their sons and daughters abandoning their farms to go to the cities. What happened? First, under the pressure of the global financial deregulation, the agricultural common policy was changed in the 1990s, the same period characterized by deindustrialization, banking rule, and deregulation, mainly in France, but also in the whole Western Europe. The indirect aids based on price guarantees disappeared and were replaced by so-called direct aids proportionate to the surface of the farms. This was done under the pressure of the World Trade Organization with the pretext of avoiding price distortions. As a result, within a context of falling purchasing power of foodstuffs, the aids decoupled from production went mainly to the big landowners, such as the Queen of England, the Duke of Kent, and the Prince of Monaco. The small and middle-sized farmers were strangled through prices decreases and also the fall of aids. The only option was either to leave or to be further strangled by the banks, including the Farmers' Bank in France, the Crédit Agricole, who became a bank like all the others, and even worse for its old clients. European Union budget for agriculture was reduced in purchasing power and has decreased in percentage of the total European Union budget. Add to that the vulnerability of all producers to the system of floating exchange rates, the middle-sized or small ones then sinking, and the big ones becoming more like experts of the Chicago market than real farmers. Today, the main talk is to replace those direct aids based on farm surfaces by environment and climate aids, of which only the very big ones can benefit. This is a policy of desertification and agricultural depopulation within a context of a green world depopulation under the law of financial interests. Within this system, there are a few sticking tape measures proposed, which are maybe relatively helpful, but not of a nature to change the situation. For example, it is proposed that the distribution of aids be based not on the surface of lands or farms, but on the number of persons working on that surface. Others call for stocks of food security against instability of the markets, fair prices, and measures to fight against world hunger. Those are good intentions, but nothing tackling the depths of the challenge. Our commitment is precisely to do that, to go to the roots of the problem. The Common Agricultural Policy failed because it did not deal with its global environment. Same thing for parity prices in the United States. You cannot do it, you cannot achieve it within a system which creates all the conditions to go in the opposite direction. Besides, even in its best years, the Common Agricultural Policy was mainly defensive. In French terms, a kind of Maginot Line doomed to fail under flanking attacks or attacks from above. And whereas it temporarily solved the food crisis within Western Europe, it did nothing to organize markets and food stocks at the needed level of an alliance of world nations, of world cooperation. Clearly, we have now, with the 4 laws of Lyndon LaRouche, not as a mantra, but as a roadmap for the fight, the means to break with the existing rules of the game, what was not done by the Common Agricultural Policy. But for that, we need to inspire and put pressure on the peoples of the world so that they pressure their governments, what was said during the preceding panel. That is for each of us an issue of life or death. And it can only be won with a winner mind, with a tenacious commitment renewed every morning with a winner mind. For that reason, let me tell you about 2 things as a conclusion. First, on the way through with which we can inspire. There are LaRouche's 4 laws as a reference to explore, facing their numerous challenges for real in the existing world. There is their application in our recent 2 programs. Build a global health system now, LaRouche Apollo mission to defeat the global pandemic crisis. That's one. And I would add, and beyond the current pandemic crisis, beyond the global pandemic crisis. And second, the LaRouche plan to reopen the US economy. The world needs 1.5 billion new productive jobs, what we discussed in this panel. It is only through this anti-parochial organizing based on a dynamic development that we can inspire people who are today so submerged by information and permanently thrown into situations leading them into emotional cop-outs, as we see on both sides of the Atlantic in the Western world. It is through our personal example, based on a tenacious directionality, every single day of our lives, that we can lead them to become fire organizers, to become free organizers, with a firing spirit. Second, I would like to give you an example of that directly linked to our subject matter. It is that of the Maison Familiale Rurale, rural family houses, a project created in France by Abbot Granreau, a French countryside priest who introduced a new way of learning in the rural areas of France and beyond. There are now 432 of these rural houses in Europe, 112 in Latin America, 118 in Africa, in Mauritania, Democratic Republic of Congo, Guinea, and in the Indian Ocean also, and a few in Asia. In France, this education is run in association with the state and the local governments, but with absolute emphasis put on the involvement of the families. Abbot Granreau was the son of a peasant family, as it was called in those days, who at a very early age questioned both the Napoleonic pyramidal organization of the French education system and the fact that the public education system led the best sons of the farmers to quit farming, leave the countryside, and more than often break with the traditionally oriented families. Abbot Granreau decided to solve the problem by launching a new system of his own that the families could afford, and he called for help to Our Lady of the Social Revolution. He was calling that in his prayers for inspiration. His idea was to have the high school age students, or even younger, reside 1 week out of every month at an educational home for professional training, which he provided. He went all around buying places to have these students spend a week every month, which he provided, not far from their homes, and run jointly with their families, and also with the teachers. The program ran from November to April so that the parents could keep their children the rest of the time to work at the farm. The education was to be paid by the parents, and the status of the students was of apprenticeship. They were apprentices. During the 3 other weeks of the month, the students were provided with 2 hours of homework, every day. And they did it, they followed it. The key to its success was the associative responsibility of the families, was family integration, and education also of the students educating also their families. This concept of family integration, which could be very useful today. The respect of the individual also, the respect of the individual personality of each student. They were not like units, they were persons. And the promotion of actions of social development. Visits to farms, producing modern tractors, or visiting rural exhibitions with also modern tractors, fertilizers, and going for advice on various forms of developing their production. Granreau started in 1935 with 3 farmers committed to support his project and 4 apprentices. And he managed in about 30 years, yes, to change the fate of the rural world and avoid at the time its debasement. The secret behind his method was to be very rigorous and at the same time to make all the students responsible of what they were doing. For every activity, one of them was appointed to be responsible for all the other students. His commitment was to give to all of them a good level of education and to give back the dignity, as he said, to his brother farmers, a knowledge of the new methods of production within, he said, the education of their souls. For him, a good farmer had to be what he called a scientist of the land. When enough pupils and students came, he separated the functions of teaching and a good and committed teacher that he organized from the Porpin high-level school in Toulouse, the high-level school of agriculture, the top in France, from those of guidance. He separated the teaching and the guidance. The guidance, was his full responsibility. Granreau wanted to create peasant leaders, as he called them, to enter the coming new world with Christian principles. He invented, on his way, an active method based on exploration, cooperation, participation, and mutual trust. He himself did change during all his life. For example, he created a section for young women and girls, then organizing a mixed-gender school, which at the times was unique in France, carefully promoting a mutual respect, of course, of the two sexes. And finally, he opened up his schools to all families, understanding that the notion of family and mutual respect was key and above religious affiliations. A lot of people were shocked, but Abbot Granreau was delighted. I am convinced that such an approach, based on the respect of every individual mind and the service to the other, should be thoughtfully considered as an inspiration for our methods of teaching today, those against which Lyndon LaRouche has so often polemicized. Not to copy it as such, of course, not to copy it, not to be a copycat of what Abbé Granreau did, accomplished, but to follow its spirit of exploration and creativity. He respected the principle of creativity above anything else. In the countries with a long-standing family culture and farming culture, family and farming culture, like in Africa today, it will be a model to ensure the transition of agricultural labor as it has been in France. When these houses worked in Africa and had enough financial means to work, they are very successful. The case of Granreau is also a good reference for how to change things. We should ourselves think much more about what Lyndon LaRouche did at the beginning, gathering a few persons in a pilot project, addressing not academic questions, but from top down, the key challenges of our times, and, as some would remember, sending memos and launching debates all the time with a few people that were around him. And he succeeded in doing so to establish something that I am sure the world would benefit in the next years, in the years to come. Then you have, in that process, the best kind of excitement of actually discussing and enriching a program all the time, and even the higher excitement to make it exist. This is a pilot project, inspiring. Let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. We're now going to hear from Diogène Senny, the founder of the Pan-African League, and he's speaking on the topic Thrive or Perish, an introduction to the geopolitics of hunger and poverty.
Okay, can the US hear me?
Yes, now you're coming through.
All right. So I will start. Thanks a lot to invite me. Dear speakers, dear participants, dear guests, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Schiller Institute for having associated me with this discussion at this very special moment. Ladies and gentlemen, far from the one-off event, the circumstances in which this conference takes place make of it an historical moment, because the enormous health, economic, and social consequences connected to COVID-19 are like challenges and confrontations launched against societies and men, in the sense of the British historians Arnold Toynbee. For once, we are going to connect the issue of hunger, poverty, and health with history. not only in a memorial function, but also and above all to view history as the most powerful manifestation of social energy and the will of man to survive. Storissimo, in other words, historicism, as the Italian would say, is the act by which one creates one's own action, one's own thought, one's own poetry, by moving from the present consciousness of the past. We know that at least 13 billion people, twice the world's population today, could be fed by the world's agriculture. Therefore, the destruction of tens of millions of women, men and children by hunger is unworthy. On matters of the economic and social rights of peoples. Ladies and gentlemen, who remember that a third of the civilian and military deaths of the Second World War were due to malnutrition, tuberculosis, and anemia? Who remembers the heaps of coffins have piled up in the churches of Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague because of hunger? And especially in Poland and Norway, the fact that some families survive by eating rats and barks of trees. 1947, 2 years after this appalling reality, who recalls still this attack by the ambassador of Great Britain while working with the commission responsible for drawing up the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? I quote, "We want free men, not well-fed slaves." End of quote. Who recalls the direct response of this Ukrainian counterparts? Quote again, "Even free men can starve to death." End quote. This exchange illustrates the beginning of a new geopolitical order, that is to say the Cold War, and the defeat of the recognition of economic and social rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of December 10th, 1948. However, how to believe that the civil and political rights can be effective without the economic and social rights? It took 45 years, almost half a century, in June 1993 for the UN to adopt a new declaration in Vienna, making all rights, civic, political, economic, social, and cultural, indivisible and interdependent. Alas, what wasted time. Ladies and gentlemen, the hope raised by the end of the Cold War in terms of economic and social rights was very quickly lost because of the fact that the planetary power of transcontinental agro-industrial companies and hedge funds, these funds that speculate on food price, arable lands, seeds, fertilizer, credits, etc., is significantly higher than that of states. Hunger is not inevitable. It comes from organized, it came from organized 90% of peasants in the South in the 21st century only have the following working tools: hoe, machete, and seeds. FAO reports in the 1920s, in 2010s, indicate that 500 million farmers in the South have no access to selected seeds, mineral fertilizers, or manure, and do not own animals. The overwhelming majority of farmers in India, Peru, Burkina Faso, Niger, Ecuador, etc. have no irrigation system. How can you be surprised then that 1 hectare of cereals gives about 700 kilograms to Africans against 10,000 kilograms for the same space for the colleagues from the Gironde in France? As we have already said, hunger is not inevitable. It is the result of the will of a few, and it is by the determination of men that she will be defeated. Some examples to illustrate predation situation by multinational of the agro industry in Africa. In Cameroon in 2006, We remember the admirable struggle led by the Development Committee of the Endo region, which brought together farmers' union and civil society in the fight against the grabbing of 11,000 arable lands by SOSUCAM, Société Sucrière du Cameroun, authorized by the Cameroonian government. It should be noted that SOSUCAM is the property of Alexandre Villegrain, a French industrialist, and that his company had already acquired 10,000 hectares in Cameroon in 1965. Here, the colonial continuum is still in full swing in the economic field. In Senegal, here it was the great Senegalese estate, GDS, belonging to French, Spanish, Moroccan, etc. financial groups, which acquired tens of thousands of arable lands in Saint Louis, depriving the peasants of necessary space for basic crops. As in Cameroon, the farmers of Wallo reduced the modest harvest as on only 1 hectare of rice organized themselves to resist with such dignity. In Nigeria, Benin, and Mali, international hedge funds also relies on local oligarchs to organize land grabs. This is how the wealthy merchant of Sokoto and Kano got hold of tens of thousands of hectares of food land. In Benin, it is the political and economic baron who accumulate hectares, voluntarily left fallow, while wealth for a higher instead of investing in the rate of Zou, the former breadbasket of Benin's wheat. Finally, we note the same trading mechanism in Mali, where wealthy businessmen acquire at a low prices to Saudi premium or hedge fund New York. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the ruin of the economy and the disaster that are looming following the coronavirus pandemic are part of what is known as cyclical hunger. Its peculiarity lies in the visible damage generated. Spectacular nature should not blind us to these real causes. However, what has been described throughout this intervention in structural hunger. Structural hunger has root causes. It is permanent and unspectacular, psychically and physically destroying millions of human beings. Structural hunger exposes millions of malnourished mothers to give birth to deficient children. Ladies and gentlemen, we will precede the alternative presented by this conference, proper or perish, by the word unity. Because for us Pan-Africanists, the question of hunger is less about food security than food sovereignty. Only political unity will give us the weapons necessary to protect the immense resource of arable land all over the African continent. It is at that price that food sovereignty will be guaranteed to all Africans. UMOJA, ni Nguvu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, particularly for that idea about food sovereignty. I think so people just know we were listening to a translation, and that's why he's still speaking. We're going next to Walter Formento, the director of the Center for Political and Economic Research of Argentina. His topic is South America on the new multipolar road.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Walter Formento. Yo soy.
Good afternoon. My name is Walter Formento. I'm the director of the Center for Political and Economic Research, CIEPE, and also a member of the Latin American Social Sciences Network, which is involved in all 5 continents. It means a lot to us to be part of this conference, and we hope we can contribute to the dialogue that is beginning here. In terms of the development and contributions of the new Silk Road and the World Land Bridge, which connects us all, we believe that South America, extending from Mexico to Argentina and Brazil, going through Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Bolivia, and Paraguay, has in its Hispano-American and South American history a real and concrete accumulation of capabilities for building sovereignty, strategic industries, science and technology, both to contribute and to receive. This stems from each one of these nations individually and then from an organized and plurinational South American community based on their common Hispano-American origins, but even more specifically on the 2001-2015 period based on UNASUR, the Union of South American Nations, and CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. Looking first from Argentina, this South American nation launched the development of its strategic industries from the very moment of its battle against the British invasions of 1805 to 1807. At the beginning of the 20th century, the process continued with the development of its oil-related energy industries and hydroelectric projects, always interacting with the international context and receiving feedback from that framework. From the Great Depression, which was caused by the systemic crisis of 1929-1944, Argentina, together with Chile and Brazil, the ABC alliance, deepened the process of sovereign development, strengthening their rail, maritime, and river transportation, as well as automobile and aircraft industries, which then became the basis for the development of their aerospace and submarine industries. While these industries maintained international ties, they always collaborated with each other, which allowed for their own joint scientific and technological development. This was once again a function of an international context favorable to South America, and particularly to Argentina, Brazil, and Chile.
Esto generó para Argentina una matriz industrial.
In the Argentine case, beginning in 1946, this positive process led to the creation between 1963 and 1991 of a state-run public-private industrial, technological, and scientific matrix in which 80% of the goods and services and parts required for national development were produced in our internal market. This also consolidated a social reality in which 90% of the labor force was formally employed, with a strong university-educated technical professional component, and in which the unemployed labor force was also formally recognized as well. So, from the standpoint of values, this was an integrated and committed social reality. That is why South America, or Hispano-America, based on its own experience, recognizes the importance of developing a national, strategic, industrial, technological complex, but also a South American community of nations as well.
La guerra y derrota que la oligarquía anglo-holandesa desde Londres y desde New York.
The war and defeat which the London and New York-based Anglo-Dutch oligarchy imposed on Argentina and on South America, and did so with a vengeance, beginning with the 1976 coup d'etat in Argentina, followed by the 1982 to 1991 Malvinas War period, put an end to this virtuous cycle and launched a cycle of decadence enforced by global financial neoliberalism. Thus today, when we reflect on the new Silk Road and new multipolar financial system, and in that context, the World Land Bridge and its empowering the productive abilities of humanity and nature including the dialogue of civilizations, we see this as auspicious and hopeful, and we are called on to commit ourselves to contribute to and transmit those initiatives promoting aerospace, transportation, and new energy technologies.
En muchas ya somos parte, como es el
In some ways, we're already part of this. There's the bioceanic rail transportation corridor from Brazil, traversing Bolivia and ending in Peru. We're also involved in the modernization of a rail line, which extends from Buenos Aires, with its factories and workshops for maintenance of machinery and railroad cars, from the province of Santa Fe to Córdoba, Chaco, Salta, and Jujuy in the north, then connecting to the main trunk line. In a joint effort, with Russia supplying components and new technologies together with Argentina, we are building a modern new railroad system capable of developing this area even further.
capacidad de llevar adelante esta tarea. También lo somos en el desarrollo de las centrales nucleares con tecnología de China y Argentina.
We are also developing nuclear reactors using Chinese and Argentine technology, as well as new hydroelectric projects in the southern Patagonia, close to Antarctica and the islands of the South Atlantic, with their natural interoceanic route that connects the three great oceans, the Indian, Pacific, and Atlantic. After 2008 to 2010 and into 2014, the financial crisis of 2008 to 2009 again paralyzed the world, and this revolved around speculative financial earnings. But today there is another world, the multipolar world, seen in the World Land Bridge, the world of the New Silk Road, committed to interacting with all continents and with all nations for a peaceful, harmonious development integrated into a new reality for all humanity and for nature. We are a committed part of this process. We see ourselves as committed in thought, in practice, and in action, committed through our entire history.
Queremos que sea nuestro primer aporte.
This is our first contribution to these conferences you have been holding and connecting us to the 5 continents and with the actors who are the great historical powers in this new commitment to humanity and nature in terms of social and integral inclusion. I send you a warm abrazo and hope to be able to contribute further to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Formento. We have gone from Europe to Africa to South America, and now we go to the Caribbean. Dr. Kirk Meighoo, political economist, broadcaster, and former senator, Trinidad and Tobago. The Caribbean's true importance in the making and remaking of the modern global economy.
Hi, my name is Dr. Kirk Meighoo. I'm a political economist, broadcaster, and former senator from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. It's a real pleasure to be here, to be part of this conference with the Schiller Institute, and I thank the organizers for inviting me. I've been friendly with the LaRouche movement and the Schiller Institute for a number of years now. There are so many things that we share in common, and there's a lot of projects that I want us to collaborate on, and this certainly is one of them. Now, I'm also a member of the official opposition party, and we do have an election coming up this year, and we hope to take government. The platform, the manifesto of our party is and this was from before the COVID crisis, was to create 50,000 new jobs in the economy. And in our small economy, we have 1.3 million people in our island, and the labor force is about 650,000. So 50,000 was a big number. However, with the COVID-19 lockdowns and what it's done to our economies and the whole global economy, we need to increase that number at least to 150,000. And by combining it with this program from the LaRouche movement for 1.5 billion productive jobs around the world, there is an incredible synergy that we must take advantage of. Now, one of the things that I'm always concerned about is that we, small states in the Caribbean, we are actually one of the bigger islands with over 1 million population. Like Jamaica has 2 million, a little over 2. We have 1, and many of the other islands are much, much smaller. There's a tendency for us to be overlooked, for us to be forgotten in such schemes. And that is part of our lack of development here. But it is not just a matter of a lack of development. It's also the type of development we've been undergoing. I'm also part of a tradition of intellectuals here, started in the 1960s, soon after our formal independence, called the New World Group. And it's incredible the overlap with the LaRouche movement in terms of our analysis and our goals and our solutions. I have always found that to be an amazing thing, and it's just another illustration on how the truth is one, and we can all arrive at the same truth from our very different points in time, space, and circumstance. And this is certainly one of those instances. But the Caribbean, the point I'm making about the inclusion of the Caribbean in this global program that the Schiller Institute and the LaRouche movement is proposing is not just a matter of charity. Because what the LaRouche movement is proposing is an end to the transatlantic system, what might traditionally be called imperialism, to the imperial system, to the post-Columbus system, if you want to put it in those terms. And that is precisely what we have been calling for decades ourselves. Because, you see, the Caribbean has a special place in this 500-year modern world economic system that we need to understand, because our participation in it was central. The Caribbean was where the modern world began. It's where Columbus came on his voyage. It's where the first global production of sugar, rum, alcohol, etc., which enriched New York, Boston, the east coast of the United States, fed into the Industrial Revolution. The organizing of these huge plantations in the Caribbean was the forerunner to industrial capitalism in Europe. And our great intellectuals, such as Dr. Eric Williams, our first Prime Minister, spoke about that in his seminal book from 1944, Capitalism and Slavery. So we've had a long experience analyzing this, our own experiences, because we represent the dark side of this modernity. Of course, modernity has brought a lot of good to the world, but in the Caribbean, this type of economy now has become, let's say since the 1980s or 90s, the neoliberal system. But it really starts from the system of slavery in the Caribbean. Because think about it. These economies were founded on slave labor, which is imported foreign labor at cheap or free cost. It decimated local economies. We made nothing for ourselves here. Everything was around sugar production mainly. Sometimes some other people had other crops. But whatever the early English colonists had here for their own self-development, tobacco, food crops, etc., local settlements, colonies in the true sense of the word, where you're making your own settlement elsewhere, part of this imperial system that the Caribbean was central to, and this global sugar production, the triangular trade where we were central, this is actually what's going on in the rest of the world. Because when they established it here, they had to gut out the independent farmers. They had to buy out all the independent landowners so that the big sugar interests could own all the land, control all the production in a global system of raw materials export, where the value added would be done elsewhere, and you break up the whole chain of production. So what did that mean? That meant no manufacturing here. What did that mean? That meant that we were connected to the metropole rather than to ourselves. So, for example, it's easier for us in Trinidad to go to New York, and it's cheaper for us to fly there than it is to a neighboring island like Curacao or even Antigua or St. Kitts, because our communications were always, and infrastructure was always to the metropole. We did not have an internal economy with manufacturing. We did not make our own clothes. We did not make our own food. We did not make our own basic commodities and services for survival. They were all imported. We were a pure import-export economy, and we remain so, whether it be in tourism or offshore banking or oil and gas like we have in Trinidad and Tobago. So we've been struggling with this issue and problem for a very long time. We have some great insight into it, and which we can offer the world. And what we see is that this same process is happening around the world to other countries. So it's as if they took this early model, pioneered in the Caribbean, which produced tremendous inequality, tremendous misery, tremendous underdevelopment. This is what the transatlantic system is projecting to every country in the world. Now, solving the problems here will help us solve the problems for the rest of the world. This is where it started. We pose some challenges because of our size, but there are also some opportunities. Our small societies in the Caribbean are like the small city-states of ancient Greece, where Plato and Aristotle and the great philosophers flourished. It's like the Florentine city-states, right? These places were 40,000 people at their maximum population. Right? We live in human-scale societies, and these massive megacities, which are part of the whole transatlantic system, mainly financial centers, processing these huge global faceless corporations. Those are inhuman environments, and I think it is not coincidental that much of the violence we're seeing in the world is happening in these big cities where there's so much enemy, so much alienation, and a lack of humanity, of the face-to-face societies that we have here in the Caribbean that have produced such amazing creativity, such amazing thinkers like V.S. Naipaul, like Sir Arthur Lewis, like Derek Walcott, like C.L.R. James, from such tiny, tiny small islands. So this is a plea, a reminder to think of how we can take our outlying territories, which seem like outliers in the world system, but were essential for the development of the modern world system. And I dare say we can play an essential part in the remaking of that world system to a more humane global system. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to make our presentation. I look forward to questions and to interacting with you and also partnering in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you also. Now we're going to hear from Bob Baker, who's the agricultural desk for Schiller Institute, and he's going to be introducing the next video, which is done by Mike Callicrate.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Schiller Institute, Mrs. LaRouche, and the excellent panelists and participants throughout the world. Look at the state of farming and food in the world, and you see huge disruptions. Just one little microbe and the new coronavirus coming on top of a system already in breakdown has led to terrible things. There's a disaster in the meat industry. The mega global cartelized packing houses from Australia to Germany to the Americas are in a breakdown crisis as workers get sick and live in poor conditions. Masses of meat animals are stranded and the farmers are hit hard as they're forced to kill their livestock. There are disasters in fruit and vegetables. Thousands of workers who travel between countries and work in hard and poor conditions in fields and orchards are sick from California to Spain and the Middle East. It's so bad, Doctors Without Borders went to Florida last month to care for thousands of poor farm workers who had nowhere to turn. In Canada, 60,000 such workers, one half of them from Mexico, are getting hit. And with the sickness hitting so many Mexican workers in Canada, Mexico's government suspended travel this week until something can be worked out. There is a disaster in the staff of life. Wheat, corn, rice. It is fortunately not because of bad crop failures somewhere, except for the locusts in Africa and South Asia, but because we are growing far too little grain, period. Lyndon LaRouche would say that the way to think of how much food the world needs is to start with 24 bushel of corn of total grains per person. What that would mean is you should be having a world harvest of 5 billion tons of all kinds of grains together. Currently, the world is growing less than 3 billion tons. And that would mean enough for direct eating as bread, noodles, tortillas, whatever you like, and milk, eggs, and meat, plus another 25% for reserves, which now, because of the World Trade Organization, does not exist. In biblical, it's 7 lean years and 7 fat years. We should have strategic storage reserves. We should have silos, warehouses all over the world of grain, cheese, butter, sugar, and other basics. Stockpiles in case of storms, epidemics, fires, locusts. We must double world food production. Instead, we have decades of what should be called a famine policy. The City of London, Wall Street circles, have extremely cartelized the world farm food chain so they can harvest money. Yes, harvest money. They decide where and how anything is produced and who gets to eat or not. They rip off the farmers with below cost of production prices and make record profits from the consumer by jacking up the retail price. And that is how you cause hunger for millions throughout the world. Now wonder, we are vulnerable to locusts and diseases. The locusts in southern Asia and East Africa are now heading westward. By August, they may reach Mauritania. This must be stopped. A fellow speaker today from Kansas, Colorado area will be talking about the physical conditions connected with just harvesting money instead of food. And we will hear from the Mexico grain belt. How did we get this way? It is not because we had no alternatives. We are in the age of the astronaut farmer. We can produce food for all. And it wasn't like we were all given a dumb pill. That comes from the entertainment and the news media, communication monopolies. We are all played off against each other, and that must stop. Farmer versus city people, nation versus nation. There is all this talk about competition in world food trade and about having a level playing field. It's all bunk. It's not a game. It's not a playing field. It's food. It's the means to life. And farmers are on the streets again in Germany with tractorcades for the right to grow food. In conclusion, I think of President Abraham Lincoln in the 1860s, when the whole United States nation was played off against each other. In fact, the British sent in forces to help bust up the new nation. Still, during Civil War and a Great Depression, in only 1 year, Lincoln and others implemented measures for science and hope. They created science-based farm colleges, the land grant system, settled the entire Midwest with the Homestead Act, crossed the country with a new railroad and corridors of development, and issued a new credit system called the greenbacks. In this same tradition, 100 years later, with the help of the two fathers of the Green Revolution, Henry Wallace and Norman Borlaug, a scientific green revolution spread from Mexico and the US and international leaders and scientists to make India food self-sufficient in 1974. China became food self-sufficient in 1984. Let's make the whole world self-sufficient in food. Let's again begin with Africa right now on an emergency basis, and then open up the universe. Thank you. I'd like to now take this opportunity to introduce Mike Callicrate, who is a board member of the Organization for Competitive Markets and a rancher and a meat producer from the Kansas, Colorado area. Thank you.
I'm Mike Callicrate. I'm in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I have a company called Ranch Foods Direct. I also produce livestock on my operation in Northwest Kansas, which I've done for the last 45 years. But my focus has really been to try to build an alternative food system to the industrial one that we have now. And when I'm asked the question, prosper or perish, it makes me think of David Montgomery's book, Dirt. And in his book, David Montgomery talks about the erosion of civilizations and the importance of soil. And without soil, we basically don't have life. And so I'm going to kind of come at this question, will humanity prosper or perish, from that perspective, because I think soil is critical to our survival as human beings. The impoverishment and nourishment of a civilization is directly correlated with the consolidation and industrialization of the food supply. Concentration of power and wealth is the greatest threat to any free society. Rather than creating new wealth from healthy soil, the current system is mining and destroying our land for the short-term benefit of a few global corporations. This is a photograph from Northwest Kansas, where I live. This photograph was taken in December 24th, Christmas Eve in 2013. The dirt cloud extended 200 miles from Colorado Springs to the Kansas border. It was 12,000 500 feet high above sea level to the top, 4 miles across, moving south at 50 miles an hour. This is soil. This is the blowing away, the destruction of civilization currently. Much of eastern Colorado's topsoil is already gone. I fly back and forth between my rural community of St. Francis, Kansas, and the urban center of Colorado Springs, where we market our meats that we produce. And this is what you see across the eastern plains of Colorado, is the mining of these soils, the withering away of that topsoil. Previously, when it had fertility, it grew healthy plants that fed livestock that then in turn became food for human consumption. We're mining our water resources. Vice on HBO's Vice did a documentary called Meat Hooked Into Water, and it talks about the global water supply being consumed and used up. This is another indication that humanity is going to perish if we don't change our ways. We're pumping the precious fossil water from the Ogallala Aquifer, just to name one of many around the world that is being pumped dry for the benefit of industrial agriculture. Again, an example of a mining operation. We're ravaging the environment. We're building factory farms in low-lying areas. These low-lying areas on the East Coast in North Carolina, South Carolina, places where there's a lot of rainfall. We're locating these facilities in low-lying areas because it's the cheap land. It's also the place where the cheapest workforce resides. So this is exploitation of the environment, of the workers, and think about being an animal in one of these facilities, inside one of these barns. Again, in Hurricane Florence, we flooded the factory farm facilities, and rather than let these animals out, they sort of learned their lesson. They kept the animals in the barn where they starved and consumed one another before they died. This is an earlier Hurricane Floyd where they let the animals out. And so we've got a total disregard of animals, which is another indication of a failing system and a failing society. St. Francis of Assisi said, if you have men who will exclude any of God's creatures from the shelter of compassion and pity, you will have men who will deal likewise with their fellow men, which is certainly what we're seeing today. This global cartel controlled food system, rather than nourish the people who sustain it, consumes them. The result is a food system that concentrates money and power at the top and poverty at the bottom, while compromising food access, quality, safety in the process. That's a quote from Albert Krebs, Agribusiness Examiner. With the help of the US government, global gangsters have turned our agriculture into a massive agribusiness mining operation. Meet felons Wesley and Josley Batista of JBS, who have been in prison and have been recently, because they're considered essential, been invited back to run the biggest meat company in the world, JBS. JBS is headquartered in Greeley, Colorado, and has been part of the 4 big meat packers now under investigation for lowering prices to livestock producers at the same time as raising prices to consumers. These men should not be involved in anything to do with a critical industry, especially food, but our government allows them to operate. Alan Saver, I thought, put it well. He said, we have more to fear from USDA than any foreign power. USDA refuses to enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act, which would have prevented the shared monopoly that the Batista brothers hold with Tyson, Cargill, and Marfrig, another Brazilian company. USDA makes life for small plants extremely difficult, making it impossible for them to operate, giving advantage to the biggest meat plants who have now failed us in this COVID-19 outbreak. The industrial food system did fail the COVID test. It has no resiliency. It is extractive. It does not create and build wealth. It extracts wealth. It destroys our very mechanisms that we create wealth from, and that is the soil. On the left, you see about my store in Colorado Springs. On the same day, March 13th, on Saturday, March 13th, 2020. On the right is the big box stores in Colorado Springs. Shelves were completely empty. No meat was available. Yet in my store on the left, which is about a 200-mile supply chain from St. Francis, Kansas to Colorado Springs, Colorado, you see full shelves. So far, our supply chain has held up well. We don't stack employees on top of each other. We have remained healthy in our operation. So let's look at what I think we ought to be doing. I think we ought to be returning to a regenerative farming and ranching operation, one that's made sustainable because it's supported by consumers who care about the soil, who care about communities and people and the environment in general. And so I've set up what I call the Callicrate Cattle Company regenerative farming and ranching concept, where basically it's a circular economy, not a linear economy that extracts. It's a circular economy that puts back into the soil, into the community, into the people. And so we start with the soil and we return to the soil. Critical to this concept working is our ability to access a marketplace that demands what we produce. Soil is the great connector of lives, the source and destination of all. It is the healer and restorer and resurrector, by which disease passes into health, age into youth, death into life. Without proper care for it, we can have no community, because without proper care for it, we can have no life. Creating community around local food will be essential in supporting this new regenerative approach to agriculture and food systems, where family farmers, ranchers, and small businesses can prosper and consumers can have access to safe, dependable, and healthy food. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final presentation today is by Alicia Diaz Brown from the Citizens Movement, Citizens Movement for Water, Sonora, Mexico. We're going to play an excerpt of this because of questions of time. Her presentation is called "Let Us Return to the Best Moments of the U.S.-Mexico Relationship."
Let's return to the best moments in U.S.-Mexico relationship. We thank the Schiller Institute and its president, Helga Sepp LaRouche, for kindly giving us the opportunity to participate in the international gathering in which special importance is given to the problems of food production. In every civilizational crisis, the threat of hunger, epidemics, and war appears. This is why we agree with the title, which headlines this meeting: Will Humanity Prosper or Perish? My name is Alicia Diaz Brown, and I live in the Yaqui Valley in the south of the state of Sonora in Mexico. I belong to a family of agricultural producers, pioneers in this valley, and I am a member of the Yaqui Agricultural Credit Union and of the Citizen Movement for Water. For many years, I have been involved in the discussion of problems related to the production of basic grains, but in the last decade, I have been more intensely involved because the policies in Mexico have grown in their disregard to the country yard, to the point of proposing to take water from this region to divert it toward activities which they consider more profitable monetarily, even though that means reducing the land under cultivation and with it the production of food. They don't care about harming a region that produces 50% of the nation's wheat, as well as a significant percentage of corn. I recently saw a photograph that captures a very evocative moment of historical intimacy and common purposes that Mexico and the United States share in the noble task of producing food to relieve hunger in the world. The picture Takes us back to the decade of the 1940s, and the photo shows the then Vice President of the United States, Henry Wallace, touring a wheat crop in the Texcoco region of Mexico and receiving technical explanation for Dr. Norman Borlaug, accompanied by Mexico's Secretary of Agriculture and ex-President Lázaro Cárdenas. The government of President Avila Camacho was just underway. There was a time in which Mexico and the United States enjoyed governments with sufficient social strength to enforce the principle of the general welfare. Those efforts culminated with the Green Revolution, whose improvements in seed genetics made it possible for there to be substantial increases in yields per acres, principally of wheat and corn. The entire world benefited from it. The hunger of hundreds of millions of human beings was relieved for a time, and it turned out to be a fundamental experiment which demolished the Malthusian and anti-population theories which accept hunger and its aftermath of death as a matter of fate. The Jacques
You'll be able to see the rest of the video up on our website. What we're going to do now, for reasons of time, of course, is to bring our entire panel, everybody that's live with us, up on screen. We've got one or two pieces of business from the first panel that we have to conclude. One question in particular, which we are going to direct to Jacques Cheminade, which will get us started. And then Diane has two questions which will be addressed to the entire panel. So this question was from Ambassador Dr. A. Rohan Pereira, the former permanent representative of the Republic of Sri Lanka to the United Nations. I'm going to direct this to Jacques. He says, the biggest foreign exchange earner for Sri Lanka has been the tourism sector, which had been dependent on tourist arrivals from Europe and on the garment export sector, mainly to the United States market. The total estimated loss as a consequence of the coronavirus lockdown is in the region of 10 billion US dollars. In the garment sector, recovery efforts will require liberal access to the United States markets. Overall, Sri Lanka will require debt restructuring arrangements with leading agencies like the World Bank and with the developed countries who determine their policies. It may be recalled that at the Non-Aligned Movement Summit Declaration, adopted in Colombo, Sri Lanka, at the Fifth Summit in 1976, cited the new international economic order, which referred to, among other things, debt restructuring, debt moratoria, and the restructuring of multilateral financial institutions like the World Bank. The idea of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is a step in that direction. Please comment on the vital question of debt restructuring amidst this coronavirus crisis and new institutions that may be required. Thank you.
Well, first, on this tourist issue, countries, very different countries, like Sri Lanka, Cuba, or France, had, because they were not able to develop industrially or to really have a fair development of agriculture, have to make money on tourism. And there are beautiful things to see in Sri Lanka, in Cuba, or in France. But this tourism was kind not of an education of people to the culture of the country, but to a kind of servant economy, a transformation of the country into a country where there was a service economy based on, let's say, arranging things from people who wanted to have fun. And this has been a complete disaster. This was because of the lack of an commitment to an economic physical development, what Lyndon LaRouche developed during all his life, and industrial development connected to, as part of, as representing this in-depth economic development. Therefore, what happened is that progressively, despite the benefits of tourism, and I would say because of it, because of the type of economy that it created, the countries were trapped into a debt system. So this affected first the countries of the southern hemisphere. It affected countries of Ibero-America, countries of Asia, in particular Africa. And through a system of accumulation of interest over interest, this is what our friend Dennis Moore called the banker's economy, or the flea market, where the free market becomes a sort of flea market where they rob you, has become that. So it has become a dependence on debt, which accumulates over debt, and then you have normally, or if you follow this accumulation of debt because of an unfair economy, you have to pay 2, 3, 4 times more debt than what you got from the loans. So this is what was imposed on the countries of the South. Now it's coming inside countries like Spain, Italy, or France at this point. So you have the whole world trapped into this debt system. And the whole economy now is an economy which is no more, I would say, a free market economy, is a controlled free market economy by the laws of the British Empire imposed by central banks. So this is only maintained through fake money. And you have flows and flows of fake money dumped on the markets, which don't go to the producers, don't go even to the consumers. This fake money goes into the whole financial circuits of the oligarchy. So this is what has to be forever eliminated. It's the British system, or the Anglo-Venetian or the Anglo-Dutch system of economy, which is not based on human labor and human development, but it's based on financial dictatorship, which I call now the system under which we are, a market economy without a market, with a dictatorship of these financial interests in all sectors, including culture. So you have to free ourselves from that. And all the life of Lyndon LaRouche, in particular, as a point of reference, historical reference, in 1982 with Lopez Portillo, and in 1976 with our friend Fred Wills in the Colombo, was to say we need to be freed from the debt, and we need a bank organized for the development of whole countries of the world. This is what the World Bank was intended to be after World War II. But then, as all the whole Bretton Woods system, it was miscarried by all the Western leaders. So what we need now is what the Chinese with the New Silk Road are doing, or let's say directing the economies. It's an economy based on real labor, physical development, and a growth based on the development of the creative potential of the human being, including in culture. There are efforts in China for classical culture, for classical Chinese poetry, and all these connected to the whole, where the West would never tell about that, to the whole development of the New Silk Road concept, of the initiative of the Belt and Road. So you have that as a reference, and you have the whole fight of our lives, which comes into this direction. And now we have a big chance that this becomes, for us, a real point existing in reality and accomplished. So we have to go much further, and we speak about the world land bridge. It has been a world land bridge, and we said it, with United States, China, Russia, India, and all of the countries that will be connected to this system. So it demands a mobilization of the leaders of the world, but also the populations everywhere, to put pressure on the leaders of the world and the economic system. And it's very interesting from that standpoint that the yellow vests in France are calling some of us to be experts in this debt moratorium or debt annulation, which get rid of this debt system and see what's fair and unfair debt. So the Glass-Steagall proposal is absolutely part of that. It means that banks who are involved in giving credit or organizing our deposit accounts would be separated from banks who are involved in the markets and were becoming elements or scions of this whole British system. So the separation will clean the system. We need much more. That's why we need a credit system for the future, developing this type of physical economy with an increase in productivity per surface, per unit of surface, per human being, and per matter brought into it. So this is a sense of a high dense economy. Flux density should be the basis for the choice of this economy. So among the four laws of Lyndon LaRouche, this is a fourth law, what you should choose once you clean the system and once you get rid of this debt system. And that's the key, because it's there that you have to invest in human creativity, in things that put human beings at the border of this capacity to create, and it would connect the space programs, the astronaut, after all, has to work both with his brains and his hands, exactly like farmers who have to work with the brains and the hands, and the more advanced farmers in the United States or in Europe are in their tractors like real astronauts on Earth. So I liked a lot this presentation of our American farmer, Mike Callicrate, which says that the soil itself has to be seen as a living matter, something that is alive, and it has to be enriched and developed. It has not to be seen as a support or something which you take advantage of. It has to see something that you feed into for the future. And I think that this concept is what leads the astronaut and the farmer, and which leads all of us in this society. And I raise this issue of farmers' education because I think what always we discuss with Lyndon LaRouche, that the type of education that it requires is an education which creates or generates in the human beings this constantly this capacity and this joy to create when you do something socially good for the others. And the big matter, the big issue today, as Helga said before, Helga LaRouche, is public health, because it's a matter that involves the whole world. It demands world cooperation. And what I keep repeating is that instead of organizing hospitals through management or financial management, we should organize states as hospitals for care and development of the people.
Okay, thank you, Jacques. Now, Diane, who is a orchestral conductor, has the following task. We have approximately 15 minutes altogether. It means that what we have here is very little time for discussion. And in fact, what's going to happen is she's going to pose something, came from a couple of countries, and each of you is going to have approximately 2 minutes, slightly less, 2 minutes, to say whatever you have to say, both to one another. You can choose to respond to the question or not, but that's what you're going to have. And so that's what I want to say. Diane will now take the floor, and if necessary, I will intervene.
Okay, so this question is from Ambassador Mauricio Ortiz, who is the ambassador of Costa Rica to Canada. And he says, in your proposal, you mention, quote, an emergency mission to build a fully functional health infrastructure for the world, particularly in South America, Africa, and parts of Asia, unquote. This proposal is very much needed in those regions. Are the international financial institutions willing to invest in that proposal? And what will be the arguments from the Schiller Institute to these institutions to make it real? If your proposal is realized, you might note that our country, Costa Rica, has an efficient primary health system with more than 1,000 rural health posts, and along with Chile and Cuba, one of the best health programs in Latin America. This is a system that can be replicated in other countries, including developed countries. I'm going to just ask the other question here as well. This one comes from the Mission of Colombia to the United Nations. Dear all, on behalf of the Permanent Mission of Colombia to the UN, I would like to pose the following question. How can Latin America play a determining role in the consolidation of this new global configuration? Best regards, Carolina Gutierrez Bachi. She is the third secretary.
Okay, so what we're going to do is this. You can choose to address either of the questions or neither of the questions because you only have, as I said, a couple of minutes. And I'm going to go, I think I'm going to start quickly with Bob Baker.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Well, in terms of the health infrastructure and my particular focus on agriculture, I think it's an absolute vital situation to develop a food system where everybody can get a proper diet of nutritional food. And that is the basis upon which to also build the argument why every community should have access to the most advanced healthcare that science has brought us to this day. But the driver in that obstacle behind the scenes is an international financial cartel that's building world global monopolies to stop that. And to the extent that the nations of the world can expose that and unite the people to take a stand against it, that's going to be a very important aspect of getting a healthcare system internationally. But this is also why this type of conference we're having becomes very instrumental, if not a key element of getting that done.
Thank you. Now I want to go to Kirk Meighoo, whose presentation I particularly appreciated.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll quickly address the problem. We're close neighbors with Costa Rica, and we have some links with them that we've established recently. And this problem of self-sufficiency is something, especially for a small society and all these small little islands, the question of self-sufficiency in everything is just simply not there. And so people have even asked questions whether we deserve to be independent, right? Or should we be permanent colonies? These are questions that stay with us in even after independence. And it's something we struggle with. We do have to have a system where we do access, just as the last speaker said, the best healthcare possible for all humanity. But we cannot simply be recipients, receivers of these things, dependents, colonial dependents, as we have been for 500 years. We have to have this system where we are also producers. So what is the system of creating a local economy, of local production, where we are contributing to our own development as well as participating with others? Now, that is a type of system that the global financial system has been against and has and never been for, right? It is the old imperial system, and they are just merely modern continuations of that. And what we have to do, what our task is to create this new system, not just money from the old system to create this, but how do we make the system of where not only do we each benefit from the best the world has to offer, but that we are also contributors as full human beings to it as well. And that's where I would like to leave it.
Okay, thank you. Walter Formento, you're up. We have his translator ready?
The translator is ready,
Okay.
but he has to turn on his microphone.
Okay. You want to let him know, or does he know it already?
Good.
Okay.
All of the contributions that are made are very significant. It's clear that for South America, the call for the 5 nations that Putin made, which Helga also referred to, is a matter of great hope because this would allow us to ensure that we could achieve peace. And therefore, it will be international politics that will allow us to decide things based on a dialogue of civilizations, of dialogue of peoples, of nations, what the future of mankind and nature will be. In Argentina in particular, the production of food, Argentina is a great producer of food, along with South America, along with Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia, Uruguay as well. The great multinational conglomerates involved in the food sector have taken control as of 30 years ago in Argentina, both in terms of our ability to produce as well as export. Therefore, at this moment in Argentina and in South America, governments have changed, and with the backing of such an international conference that President Putin has called for, we can move forward in the providing sovereign channels for both producing and exporting. The policies that can be carried out inside Argentina in the food sector have to do with allowing producers' cooperatives, allow them to be a part of the great conglomerates that engage in production. We shouldn't dissolve large-scale production and technology.
Yes, could you have him summarize?
But rather introduce the nations and introduce all society through such cooperatives so that they participate in the solution and to be part of the solution. Therefore,
we're gonna have to leave it there.
If there is a way to democratize production.
I'm gonna have to stop. Okay, thank you. Sorry, we have to go move on. Mike, Mr. Callicrate. You there?
Hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. We had a little glitch, but we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was really moved by Dr. Kirk's comments about islands and the small economies on those islands, and I can really get somebody pretty seriously depressed when we talk about the state of the world. But I can also lift them and get them more excited when I talk about the possibility of going home to our communities and making them as good as we possibly can. Become wealth creators, grow things, make things, restore the primary wealth creating enterprises to societies around the world. And like with Kirk, if you can just stop the predators, the economic, the financial, the big food monopoly predators from extracting the wealth and leaving nothing but poverty from behind, I think we can begin to repair this damage. And because we do control as farmers and ranchers and citizens, we do to a large extent, control our ability to create the wealth. It's what happens to it after we create it. And so the last speaker talked about we shouldn't dissolve the big corporations. I would argue, yes, we should dissolve them. The big corporations should be broken up, not completely eliminate their facilities, but at least put them to where they have to perform in line with the public good. And so I love that analogy of those small islands of Trinidad and Tobago and islands all across the country, and how that is very much like the islands in rural America and rural communities around the world. And I'm saying, let's go back to making things and growing things and teach that and kill this model of industrialization of these critical industries like food. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. We're trying to get Diogène's audio up, but I don't think we have it yet. And if we don't, let's go to Jacques.
Just one word about Cuban doctors to speak about an island. It's a proof that you can have the most advanced medicine, interferon, where French doctors have to go there to learn from them. Then you have the best doctors because they stay alive where the patients stay alive. And third, they are involved in cooperation with other countries in the whole world. And they send them and they do a very good job. And in particular now, they are in Andorra, in Europe, in Italy, and now in French Martinique. So the French had to recognize, and sometimes difficult for them, that these were the best. There is a team of 15 Cuban doctors in Martinique now. So that's a proof that an island can do an excellent job in a very advanced field and at the same time the most human.
Okay, thank you. Now, I hope that we have the audio for the Pan-African Congress representative. We are not going off until I hear that.
Le représentant du panafricanisme qui peut dire quelque chose, mais je ne sais pas si on va pouvoir l'entendre.
Just a minute. The problem is we have him in French, which would be fine if I could speak it. Just hang out. We refuse. We're going to do a strike. We're going to do a sit-in until we hear from him. So.
No, let's go.
All right. Okay, we're going to try again. See if we can get him.
Try again. Essaye.
Go ahead.
Alors, moi, je t'entends.
Is that what the case is? All right, so we don't think it's going to work.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Houston can hear you. Yes. Go ahead.
The global question at the end of poverty is just a part of the world situation and the African situation. We all know that when we present the situation of the continent, we are more discussing the question of the debt, money, slavery, and we forget that, for example, monoculture, which have been imposed justement by the international cartels, have destroyed our agricultures. With the hedge funds that I denounce because they want to make money with our land. And they buy what we have in our continent, in our country, to generate profit for them, for a small group of people, but not allow millions of lives of people to develop their land. So that's why this question of agriculture and self-sufficiency in Africa is one of the most important problems, which is not agriculture for now. It's a money culture, not agriculture we have. So if we want to have modern rice, we have to have modern development. Donc, it's very, very important for us, this agricultural question, as we see that it is a world problem. And what was used before by the African farmers now are not in their own hands, because it is in the hands of the hedge funds, speculative hedge funds. So it is very important to understand. And it's not very well known in the international debate now. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you very much. So now, Diane, you have 45 seconds and I have 45 seconds. So do your postlude.
Okay, I'll be very brief, which is that I think we should all remember that we have been blessed to inhabit a beautiful, fertile planet, which is very conducive to sustaining life, and in particular human life, if we are sane. But there are 2 trillion galaxies or more in the universe, and each of these may have many other planets. So contrary to the views of the Malthusians and the money changers, the creativity of each and every human being on this planet is urgently needed, because we are not capable of making too many discoveries to develop the universe as a whole. And therefore, we have to grow into a new era of mankind.
Thank you. So I will now conclude this panel, largely due to time, by just pointing out that we've had Europe, Africa, South America, the Caribbean, and the United States all on this panel in a form of a discussion. This is the process that must be correlated to whatever happens among heads of state. And that this process, which the Schiller Institute is initiating, which is also bringing up various forms of important ideas and painful truths as well, is crucial to the actual success of the global four-power and related summit that we've been talking about. Finally, in the era of coronavirus, this is the only means by which people will be able to prosper and not perish, is this dialogue, this people-to-people dialogue that we've conducted here. I want to thank all of the panelists that were with us today. I think that there's a lot that can be done also in additional presentations that we may find in the future, pairing some of you together. I'd certainly like to see the Pan-African Congress together with Mr. Mike Callicrate. I'd like to see Kirk Meighoo involved in some discussions like that. Jacques is always welcome, and he's always teaching us things. He has something new for us today. Go back and take a look at this presentation afterwards, because he had some very interesting ideas that he put forward there. So we're going to conclude now. The third panel will begin at 4:15. That's 15 minutes past its regular starting point, and we will see you then.